Las Vegas made a $1.4 billion gamble, and if it fails, the city dies. Over 2.3 million people live in the middle of the Mojave Desert. No rivers, no lakes, no aquifers. Everything depends on one source: Lake Mead. For 20 years, that lake has been draining. By 2022, it dropped so low the city had months before total water loss. Not a shortage, not restrictions, gone. So engineers did something no one had ever attempted. They drilled a tunnel 3 miles through solid rock beneath the lake bed itself. $1.4 billion. 7 years. Reaching water no drought could touch. They called it the third straw. It should have solved everything. But here's what they didn't tell you. The lake is still draining. The tunnel only reaches so deep, and 40 million people across 7 states are fighting over the same disappearing river. So the real question is not whether Las Vegas survived. It's whether they just bought time before the desert wins. In 1940, Las Vegas was a forgettable railroad town with 8,000 residents. The Mojave surrounded it like a wall. Nothing grew here. Nothing was supposed to. Then came the casinos. Then came the highways, the air conditioning, and something more powerful than all of them combined: the American appetite for reinvention. The population did not grow gradually. It exploded. By the 1970s, Las Vegas was expanding faster than nearly anywhere else in the country. By the 1990s, it had become one of the fastest-growing metro areas in American history. The city drew people like a magnetic force, and they came knowing full well what the desert meant. They came anyway. Today, the Las Vegas Valley is home to 2.3 million residents. 40 million tourists arrive every year. The city shows no signs of slowing down. All of them need water. Las Vegas consumes approximately 300,000 acre-feet of water annually. That translates to nearly 98 billion gallons. To visualize that number, it is enough water to submerge the entire island of Manhattan under 3 feet of liquid every single year. Nearly 90% of every drop comes from one place: Lake Mead, fed by the Colorado River. For decades, this arrangement worked because Lake Mead seemed infinite. The reservoir stretched across the Nevada-Arizona border, built during an era when the Colorado River's flow appeared limitless. Engineers believed the numbers. They built their projections on certainty that did not exist. The Colorado River Compact, signed in 1922, divided the river's water among 7 states based on measurements taken during some of the wettest decades in regional history. Those measurements were dangerously optimistic. Scientists later discovered that the agreement allocated far more water than the Colorado River actually produces in most years. That miscalculation compounded silently for a century. Las Vegas inherited a water future built on a flawed mathematical foundation: a booming city, a shrinking river, a single lake standing between millions of people and catastrophe. And the lake was already starting to disappear. Water engineers call them intake pipes. Las Vegas knew early that it was living on borrowed time, so it built its survival in stages. The first intake, positioned at 1,050 feet above sea level, was constructed in 1971. It was a straightforward piece of infrastructure: a pipe pulling water directly from Lake Mead and pumping it toward a rapidly growing city. At the time, it seemed like more than enough. Lake Mead was full. The Colorado River was flowing. The idea that the lake could ever drop low enough to threaten the intake seemed almost theoretical. Water managers planned for growth. They did not plan for disappearance. By 1993, the population had doubled, then doubled again. One intake was no longer enough. Engineers built a second pipe. Intake number 2, positioned lower at 1,000 feet elevation, was designed as a backup. Insurance against the possibility that lake levels might one day fall far enough to compromise the first. It was a cautious, forward-thinking decision. It was still not enough. Both intakes were engineered for a world where Lake Mead stayed reasonably full, a world where the Colorado River delivered what the 1922 Compact promised, a world that, by the early 2000s, was already vanishing. The critical number that kept water engineers awake at night was 895 feet, that is dead pool, the elevations at which water can no longer flow past Hoover Dam under any circumstances. At that level, both existing intakes become useless. The pipes are still there. The pumps still work. But the water they were built to reach simply sits below their openings, inaccessible and irretrievable. By July 2022, Lake Mead had dropped to just over 1,040 feet in elevation. Intake number 1 was operating dangerously close to its functional limit. The Bureau of Reclamation's projections warned that continued decline was not just possible, it was probable. At the rate the lake was falling, water managers calculated they had years, not decades, before intake number 1 went dry entirely. Inside the Southern Nevada Water Authority, the internal alarm was no longer quiet. The original intake pipes were never built to handle what was coming. Something had to go deeper. The plan was audacious. The execution was nearly impossible. Engineers at the Southern Nevada Water Authority had a single objective: build a third intake pipe positioned so deep beneath Lake Mead's surface that no drought in recorded history could ever reach it. Not near the bottom, below it. Through the bedrock underneath the lake bed itself, reaching water at 860 feet elevation. Lower than Dead Pool. Lower than anything either existing intake could touch. Lower than any municipal water intake ever constructed in the United States. To get there, they would need to drill a tunnel 3 miles long through solid volcanic basalt, some of the hardest rock on the continent, while working hundreds of feet below an active reservoir holding trillions of gallons of water directly overhead. Construction began in 2008. From the start, nothing was easy. A massive tunnel boring machine nicknamed Sandy by the crews who operated her was assembled underground and set to work grinding through basalt layer by layer. Sandy measured 23 feet in diameter, wide enough to drive 2 vehicles side by side through the finished tunnel. She was precise and powerful, and completely unprepared for the geology waiting ahead. Unexpected rock formations forced crews to stop and recalculate. Equipment broke down under pressures that engineering models had underestimated. Water seeped through fissures in the rock, threatening to flood active sections of the tunnel before sealing work could catch up. The heat underground was relentless. Workers operated in confined spaces, deafened by the grinding of steel against ancient volcanic stone, acutely aware that an active lake sat directly above their heads. Project engineers described the operation as threading a needle through a mountain blindfolded underwater with no margin for error. Maintaining tunnel alignment over 3 full miles of drilling through shifting volcanic formations required constant measurement corrections. A deviation of even a few degrees would compound across that distance and mean missing the target shaft entirely. Every calculation carried consequences that could not be undone. Sandy completed her run in 2014. The tunnel was sealed, tested, and declared operational in 2015. The engineering had worked, the impossible had been built. The bill that followed made even the most hardened infrastructure veterans go quiet. DOLA $1.4 billion. Every dollar came from residents and businesses of Southern Nevada through steadily increasing water rates that climbed year after year as construction dragged on and costs mounted. It became a tax on survival, and most people had no choice but to pay it. Through the early 2000s, Lake Mead had been draining in a slow, steady decline. Then the decline accelerated. By 2021, federal water managers declared the first ever water shortage on the Colorado River, a designation that triggered mandatory cuts to water allocations across multiple states. By mid-2022, Lake Mead had dropped to just over 26% of its total capacity, the lowest level ever recorded since the reservoir was filled in the 1930s. A lake that once stretched 247 square miles and plunged 532 feet at its deepest point was hollowing out from the inside. The retreating shoreline told the story that the numbers could not fully capture. Boat docks sat stranded hundreds of feet from the water's edge, their ramps descending into cracked, bleached lake bed. A bathtub ring of white mineral deposits climbed the canyon walls, marking every foot the lake had lost. Ghost structures reappeared from the exposed lake bed, old foundations, submerged roads, the ruins of St. Thomas, a resort town that had sat underwater since 1938, emerged like a monument to what the water used to cover. Without the third straw already in place and fully functional, water managers estimate that Southern Nevada would have faced emergency restrictions severe enough to threaten the economic stability of the entire region. The DOLA $1.4 billion project, completed 7 years before the crisis peaked, had effectively served its purpose before most residents even understood what it was built for. Then something unexpected happened. The winter of 2022 to 2023 delivered record-breaking snowpack across the Rocky Mountains. Snow levels in the upper Colorado River Basin exceeded seasonal averages by extraordinary margins. As temperatures warmed in the spring, that snowpack released slowly, feeding rivers and streams that drained toward Lake Mead. The reservoir rose by more than 20 feet in a single year, a reversal so dramatic that the Bureau of Reclamation scrapped its decline projections and rewrote its 24-month outlook entirely. But scientists urged immediate caution. One exceptional snow year does not rewrite 20 years of overuse. The Colorado River Basin had just endured one of the driest 2-decade stretches in recorded history. The lake remained more than 160 feet below full capacity. The recovery was real. It was also fragile, weather-dependent, and built on conditions that climate models suggested would become increasingly rare. Las Vegas understood early that drilling alone could not solve a math problem this severe. A city consuming 98 billion gallons of water per year, drawing from a shrinking lake in a desert getting hotter every decade, no tunnel, no matter how deep, could outrun those numbers forever. So alongside the third straw, the Southern Nevada Water Authority built something equally ambitious. Not a pipe, a culture. Since 2002, Las Vegas has cut its per capita water consumption by more than 40%. Not despite population growth. During it, the metro area added hundreds of thousands of residents over that same period and still managed to use less total water than it did 2 decades ago. Las Vegas recycles approximately 99% of its indoor water. Treated wastewater discharged back into Lake Mead earns the city return flow credits that count against its annual Colorado River allocation. Every gallon used indoors and returned to the system is effectively used twice. Nevada also passed legislation banning ornamental grass, the decorative turf that lines medians and covers suburban front yards without serving any functional purpose. The removal program is estimated to save approximately 6 billion gallons of water annually. Outdoor water is where the real conservation battle was fought and won. The third straw reaches water at 860 feet elevation. That number was chosen carefully, deep enough to access water even when Lake Mead drops below the dead pool threshold. But the Colorado River system has a harder limit. Full dead pool, the point at which no water can physically flow past Hoover Dam under any conditions, sits at approximately 895 feet. Below that level, the third straw itself becomes irrelevant. The intake still exists, the tunnel is still intact, but the water it was built to reach is simply no longer there. Climate projections for the American Southwest are not ambiguous. The region is getting hotter, drier, and more unpredictable. A combination that stresses every assumption water infrastructure was ever built on. Paleoclimate research shows that the Colorado River Basin has experienced mega droughts lasting decades, conditions far more severe and far longer than anything in the modern instrumental record. The 20-year dry stretch that drained Lake Mead to 26% capacity may not have been an anomaly. It may have been a preview. Las Vegas is not unique. Phoenix watches the same lake. Los Angeles draws from the same river. Farmers across Arizona and California irrigate with the same allocation that the 1922 compact promised, and the Colorado River can no longer consistently deliver. The third straw cost DOLA $4 billion. It took 7 years to build. It solved the immediate problem of reaching water that 2 existing pipes could not touch. But it did not solve the desert, and the desert is still winning. The tunnel is drilled. The water still flows. But somewhere beneath Lake Mead's surface, the clock is still running.